So I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. This is the Shabbat of Parshat Noach. So this is the story of Noah. And there is the story right at the end of Noah, of this Torah portion, is actually the story of the Tower of Babel. And the story of the Tower of Babel, we know it. The people are gathered in the east, and they say, let us build a tower up so we can rival God. And God is worried that they're building this tower as they go higher and higher. God confounds their speech, and that's why we are spread all over the earth, and there are all of these different languages. And you can even look back as it is a lovely retcon, as a way of saying, who is going to throw the people into diaspora? The Babylonians. So here's a good story we can pin, or a negative story we can pick before there's even a Babylon in the bunch. Right? So many of you are familiar with that story of the Tower of Babel. And I happen to come across the most interesting response to the Tower of Babel. How many of you like to complain, or as we say in Yiddish, kvetch? Do I have any complainers, kvetchers out there? Good. I am guessing that all of you have like a morning show, whether it's a radio show or it's a TV show, or I will tell you one of my morning routines to wake up every day is I listen to the podcast of the broadcast from the night before of the show called PTI, Pardon the Interruption. It's an ESPN show, and it features two incredible sports journalists, Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon. Tony Kornheiser is Jewish. Tony Kornheiser loves to kvetch a lot. In fact, when Nathaniel, my son, gets in the car, usually when I walk the dogs is when I'm listening to PTI, and so he catches the second half of it as we're driving to school, and his first move is to hit mute or to pause to stop it because he doesn't want to listen to these two old guys kvetching at each other. Yes, that's exactly what he says. And then he just looks at me and smiles. I love listening to Tony and to Michael because they give me this incredible rundown of the sports the day before, different kinds of insights and questions. It's really quite a fun, instead of reading the morning news, the sports page, which I did growing up, I get to listen to them process what they're seeing in the world of sports. And wouldn't you know, this week, PTI, Pardon the Interruption, is turning 20. It's been on for over 20 years, and they are doing a whole process of interviewing in order to kind of honor the 20th anniversary of the show. So first of all, just to kind of tell you what a kvetch Tony Kornheiser is, Tony Kornheiser opens the interview saying, I didn't even really want to do this interview because 20 is just an arbitrary number, and they're gonna close down the show next week. Right? So you can already hear it. Go for the worst possible scenario. Start with the worst first. Right? That's a great kvetch, isn't it? And they start going back through the history, and that's not what caught my attention with the Tower of Babel. It was something they were having an interview. They had just started to pitch the idea of PTI to Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon. They were very well-known and renowned journalists at the Washington Post, working in the sports bureau from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And to hear them talk sports history is absolutely amazing. And there they are pitching this to the two of them. Tony comes in, and he's meeting with the executives as they're trying to figure out if this is going to work. They're negotiating the contract. And he goes in, and they're sitting in the room, and he steps up to the front of the room, and he says, I'm about to sign a 2-year contract, but I don't think this is going to last 3 weeks. But I get all my money, and I have 3 other jobs. Looking at all of them. Now, all of the interns sitting in the room are like, we don't have 3 other jobs. We got to make this work. And he continues with his pessimism. He says, look, guys, don't buy, rent. Don't get attached to this. Don't say, I'm going to be rich and go buy that house. It's like dry cleaning. You drop it off today and expect to pick it up tomorrow and keep moving. And Vic walks out of the room. And they're all looking at like, what just happened here? Here they have the promise of this incredible show, these two great journalists. This is going to be an amazing opportunity. And Tony just told them, don't plan on it actually succeeding. It's gonna fail. Pa-pa-pa. He didn't say the pa-pa-pa, Kana Hora, but can't you hear it in his voice? And what's interesting is Michael Wilbon comes in later, and all of them are like, Tony told us this is going to be a failure. He told us it's not going to work. We don't know. And he looks and says, don't listen to Tony. He said, Tony always says that the sky is always falling, and it doesn't mean anything. I heard that in the interview. And there I was, and I was listening to it. And my first response was, oi, here is just this grumpy Jewish sports writer. This is just him being a kvetch. And part of it is, that's his natural personality, I'm going to guess. And part of it is he's putting on a show for the viewers, right? Because you got the nice guy and you have the bad guy, and so he's going to kvetch it up so then Michael Wilbon gets to be the nice one. But then I started thinking about the Tower of Babel. And I realized that in Tony's response, in his comment of don't buy, rent, of saying this isn't going to last 3 weeks, of saying don't think you're going to get rich and go buy a house, plan on it failing. What an interesting response to the Tower of Babel. Because what is the Tower of Babel? Yes, we've all kind of heard that story. Everyone on earth had the same language and the same words. And as they migrated from the east, they came to a valley in the land of Shinar, and they settled, and they had their bricks. Come, let us make bricks and burn them hard. The bricks were as stone, and they said, let us build a city and a tower with a top in the sky and make a name for ourselves. We've all heard that, and then you hear God's response. What I'm always intrigued by is it's not just the hubris that they're going to build a tower up to God. The rabbinic commentary on it adds something else. They get so far into building the tower, it gets higher and higher. Their intent is on how high they could build the tower to the point where, catch this, the brick was more precarious in the sight of the builders than the human beings. If a man fell down and met his death, no one took no notice. But if the brick dropped, they wept because it would take a year to replace it because the tower had gotten so high. And description after description that they were so involved in building the tower, what did they forget? The human beings. And that is what God was concerned with and why their speech got confounded. And that is why the Tower of Babel came crumbling down. Think about what Tony Kornheiser said and how he was saying it, that pessimism. What an interesting response to the Tower of Babel. Because it's easy to dismiss the kvetchiness. It's easy to dismiss the complaint, but it's such a powerful and important counterbalance to our ego that gets driven by success, by how much we can build or how much we can take care, we can collect. There is in that such interesting humility and in that pessimism to balance the ego. Don't get so high on what we might build because it all might come crashing down. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. Cain ahora. Don't say good things. Don't get so wrapped up in your success because what are you doing? Cain ahora? You're inviting the evil eye. I know that there is that part of Jewish life and Jewish thought that, and I say it all the time, right? When you're tempted to cry, you laugh, and when you're tempted to laugh, you cry. I always knew there was that balancing that you don't get so wrapped up in the success because you end up cursing yourself, or you don't get so pessimistic because you then end up not missing out on success, but to see it in relation to the Tower of Babel. To watch as they sat there and built higher and higher and ignored the human beings, ignored what might happen. And here was Tony, as they start to build this show, saying, don't get thinking about the heights we're going to reach, because it probably isn't going to last anyway. Such a beautiful and powerful part of Jewish thought. It's part of the response, because it can't be the only part of the response. Because the truth is, even with all of our pessimism, even with all of our kanahora and spitting and throwing salt and all of that stuff, look what we've achieved as a Jewish community. Sheldon, you're always one of those that tells me how intrigued you are. Your hero is Yochanan ben Zakkai. As we watch the temple be destroyed by the Romans, the second temple, we have still found a way to survive and always come back. And that, I think, is also part of the magic and the transcendence of something with, pardon the interruption, with this show. Because it isn't just Tony Kornheiser's pessimism or his kvetching that's there. Something else caught my attention that was the real thing that is built. So even as Tony is saying to those people, don't get wrapped up in the success of the show because it could come crashing down at any minute, something really interesting happens as you continue to listen to the podcast. Because the rest of the podcast, what does it do? It talks about the friendship and fellowship between Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon. It talks about the atmosphere that they created in the Washington Post, in that sports division, how they were always hollering at each other and questioning each other and talking to each other and bringing people in, making that space alive with thought, with consideration, with sports, with knowledge. They didn't build an edifice. They built a relationship out of words. And that was so striking to me that it's not about building towers to get higher. What they built was a human relationship, because the human relationships are what sustains more than the huge buildings that you can build. Why was Yochanan ben Zakkai successful in saving the people of Israel after the destruction of the Second Temple? Because his students followed him from Yavna and created that relationship of one person teaching Torah to another one, that when two people study Torah together, the divine presence rests between them. That's why, not because of the format, and not because they're on ESPN, but because of the relationship of these two human beings, showing both what is fun about sports, but what is incredible about humanity. That is what has made that show successful for 20 years. And that's the thing. That's what to remember. Both that, how do we balance that just drive to consume and build and look for all of our successes with humility, with that little bit of kvetch and complaint and that pa and the kanahora, but also how do we lift up humanity? It's not by the incredible stuff we build, and that's the reminder. It's by the relationships. The way we find to lift each other up. That's what Michael Wilbon and Tony Kornheiser do. They listen to each other. They share the stories. They share each other's perspectives. They debate and they argue, but they also appreciate and listen and learn. What was the first psalm my mother sang to me? That's how my mother sang me to sleep. And when I was listening to that podcast, and when I think about the Tower of Babel, I realize what it means to be human, but also how Judaism helps us to be the best human beings we can be. How good and pleasant it is that brothers can sit together. We're not talking, do we ever talk about what kind of chairs they're sitting in? Do we ever talk about how magnificent the table is? No. What do we talk about? Hine ma tov u'ma'naim shevet achim gam yachad. What does that celebrate? What does that remind us to do? It's that we, as human beings, create something magnificent, powerful, when we bring the divine into the world by the way we just sit and talk and learn together. And with that, I say, Amen.